labor forces, whether it's also politicians allegedly who are trying to fight back given what is happening in the country. So it was also very hard for us to trust anyone, like you're walking, but when someone is talking to you, you're looking over your back, because number one, you don't know if someone is going to trail you. You don't know if someone knows you from somewhere genuinely. You don't know if this is a genuine protester. And then when you move forward and you meet like crowds of people, we're like crossing the road to the other side, because we're like, okay, are these the crowds that are robbing people, So I think that was different, because at the initial phase of this protest, like people are just huddling together, and people are walking peacefully. You're not afraid that someone is gonna grab your phone. You're not afraid of that. But today we were even telling ourselves, oh my God, we need to buy like a sling bag and put our phones inside. So that alone was quite different. And I think what we've also seen in other, even on social media in other parts of the country, the looting, burning cars and all that, those are not the peaceful and the Gen Z protesters we're talking about. And I think they're just tarnishing this organic movement that we saw beginning 2 weeks ago. And it's sad that people are coming out genuinely to talk about what's ailing this country, and we're trying to quell that fire using tactics that are actually hurting the citizenry even more. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. So
Claire,
really having to...
Claire?
Yes.
Sorry, I wanted to add, there was also a lot of visible private security guards, specifically guarding particular buildings. Many, like some buildings had up to 20, 30 just security guards just surrounding entrances and glass windows. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Wow, so a lot more private security guards there. So quite a marked difference between today's protests and the ones that have been happening previously. But now I want us to talk a little bit about how we found ourselves in this situation. And I'd like to just get initial thoughts from all of you. And maybe we'll start with you, Professor Monda. Kindly tell us what you think about the situation. How did we get ourselves in to the point where we've had protests that were supposed to be peaceful, but now we have so many deaths, many families have been affected, arrests, abductions, and so many injuries?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I'd frame the challenges in three broad categories, right? One is a crisis of legitimacy. The second is a mismatch between domestic needs and international ambitions on the part of the Ruto administration. And then the third area is this question about fiscal autonomy. And this touches with the domestic and the international. Under crisis of legitimacy, we're thinking of issues like the fiscal mismanagement, questions of corruption, failing of the KK administration in terms of campaign promises, taxation, the IMF/finance bill 2024, questions about exactly who wrote this bill and for what reasons, extrajudicial abductions, and then the very problematic issue of the military on the ground. I think these are all issues that lead to this crisis of legitimacy for the current administration. Then the second element of it is this mismatch between domestic needs and international ambitions. And under this, it's also tied to legitimacy, but it's specifically in relation to the question of Ruto's recent visit to the US, where his administration wants to punch way above its weight in terms of pleasing the US, getting into alliances with Western partners. And we see that in terms of the correlations, the associations, and partnerships with the IMF, but also with our police who are being sent to Haiti. And that ties in with the domestic, because when we think about Kenya police being sent to Haiti, this is very much tied with the Biden administration's plan for global governance. But it directly affects Kenyans in terms of our national security, because we have gaps in security. We have sections of the Rift Valley, many areas of Kenya which are, are very insecure. But then tied to the other question of international ambitions and pleasing the US and IMF is the question of austerity, right? So the Ruto administration borrowing from these international partners. We got aid upwards of $1 billion from the US. And Uncle Sam never there's no free lunches in international affairs. So that's tied directly to Kenya's current condition, because you have to pay these IMF loans back. And to do that, you either have to raise revenue or cut spending. And the Ruto administration attempted to raise revenue through increased taxes and the finance bill. So I think that's the second element. And then the last element is a question about fiscal autonomy, right? In terms of who's deciding how Kenya's budget is going to be created and how it's going to be spent. If you think about the Kenyan GDP, it's about $122 billion. Almost $80 billion is debt. So we're already way sinking knee deep, close to neck deep in debt. And I think this is really creating a lot of the challenges we have on the streets in Nairobi today, because this $80 billion in Chinese and American debt has to be paid somehow. How does that happen? You raise taxes and you cut services. And this is also very problematic, because we know how the IMF deals worked for Kenya and developing countries in the 1990s. They just didn't end well. We saw cuts in public goods in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, and the gap between the super wealthy and the poor really increased. So I think there's a very interesting correlation here between what's happening abroad, what William Ruto is trying to do and his expound in terms of his image abroad, how he's perceived, particularly in the West, by the Biden administration as this beacon of democracy and leader of the global South, but the contradictions that we see in that in terms of the actual governance on the ground and the type of autocratic practices, extrajudicial killings, and arbitrary arrests. So I'd really highlight it in those three major areas: questions of legitimacy, mismatches of domestic and foreign, and then the broader questions about fiscal autonomy and how we are borrowing and living way above our means and our needs, but how a lot of these resources end up getting wasted through corruption and through budgeted corruption, which I think is making people very upset.
Okay, thank you for that. And we'll delve a little bit deeper into those matters, the fiscal autonomy and whatnot. But I'd also like to hear your thoughts, Madge, on the situation and how we got here.
Thank you, Claire. So basically what I think the main reason is why we got here is corruption. So we have a very deep rooted corruption in our country, and that even leads to members of parliament being bought into the government. And as a result of the same corruption, we cannot account for the taxes that we are, for the expenditure, how the money is spent is not being accounted for. But as a result, we keep borrowing more and we keep needing the citizens to actually pay for the taxes. But the citizens cannot pay for the taxes where they cannot even see the results of these taxes here. So lack of implementation of policies or even using the taxes appropriately has led to lack of jobs in Kenya. And as a result, we have a very high rate of unemployment among the youth. So the people who were supposed to help them are the members of the parliament whom they gave a mandate. So, but these members of parliament, however, due to corruption, tend, unfortunately, to vote according to their party expectations. And this is whereby even the members of parliament the citizens actually came out and say, no, we do not want the finance bill. We want you to vote no. But nevertheless, the people who had the mandate, the members of parliament, still went ahead and voted yes. So this made the citizens to feel like we gave you the mandate, but you're not listening to us. You're not listening to us, and the level of unemployment in these, especially the young people, it didn't make any difference for them to sit back and not protest. So they said, we are living dead. We are the living dead. So we can still as well go out there and protest, and we don't care what is going to happen to us. So actually, it is the corruption in the government that led to the whole situation. And it's a cancer that's eating up our country. And we hope to really find solutions moving forward. I know it's not going to be immediate, but we need to really put channels in place, because otherwise we're going to really circle back to the same place over and over. Back to you, Claire.
Okay, thank you for that. So as you said, people felt like they were not being listened to. And so they went to the streets and said, let's see what happens. And that's what we've seen on the streets. And as you said, it's not a one-day thing, but the change needs to start from somewhere. Now, Nerima, as you said, you work very closely with the youth, and they have been telling you, what have they been telling you really about their problems when it comes to their economic situation? What are some of the issues that are really close to their hearts and things that they're struggling with? Because as we said, this has been protests that have been led by Gen Z. We have other generations there. We have the millennials and other generations, but it has really been, we've really seen the Gen Z come out and really speak up, and really are very well versed with the now rejected finance bill. They're really well versed with what they want and what they do not want. So what are the youth telling you when you interact with them? What are some of the economic issues that are really close to them?
The limited opportunities or lack thereof. We've seen a lot of young people being angry, especially when they see us. Florence Bore was sharing that they should go on the National Employment Authority platform and look for jobs there. And we know that, Kenya churns out up to 1 million young graduates annually. And one of the promises that the president made was he was going to have created at least 1 million jobs annually to cushion these young people, but that hasn't been the reality. And of course, what has already been mentioned by Madge in regards to the blatant corruption, the opulence, we're seeing the mismanagement of resource. And also, I do think that we are dealing with a population that is more educated. So when, Mwai Kibaki came in and he pushed for free primary education, we're also seeing a population that has had the constitution now for about almost 14 years. And we are basically practicing and testing the viability of the constitution. But also Kipra did produce a study in 2013 that showed it takes a young person who's maybe just turned 18 looking for some form of opportunity or formal work 1.5 years to tarmac. That was 2013. So 10 years later, we're seeing people tarmacking up to 3 years, even 5 years. Some people haven't gotten any formal employment. So the opportunities that we're seeing being pushed is these online digital jobs. At the same time, they don't have social security. People who are interested in maybe forming their own businesses, but then again, the environment is not conducive for them to be able to have their own startups stabilized. So there are a lot of challenges, and also seeing a lot of misinformation. So even some information in regards to the finance bill and where it is now and whether it's still a bill, what does it mean, the president withdrawing, even that's something that I personally am still trying to understand what it means. And there's a lot of questions within the legal sector, and I do know dockets do not have the capacity or the skill. And so, of course, a huge complaint is one, just how large government is, the public wage bill, just the extravagance of it, but also the capacity and skill of the individuals who have been nominated to lead certain sectors do not have the capacity to lead them. So there's a lot of frustration in that as well.
Okay, and as you're saying, some people are not even aware who the Treasury CS is, which is a problem. And then there's the misinformation. And as you said, it's not quite clear. People are not quite clear about what happens now that the bill has been rejected. As you said, there are very many different opinions. So that is now an issue. And we'll talk about what next later on. But I'd like to stay on this issue of people, youths, and other people seeing largesse and whatnot, and that angers them. And they're saying, you're talking about someone tammacking for 3 years, more than 3 years, and being unable to start their businesses. And then they're seeing all this largesse and whatnot, and it has been, something that really does not sit well with a lot of people. Bina, what do you have to say about that as well? Have you experienced this as you communicate with people as well?
Oh, my God. I think, let me first of all just start by saying, if there's also one thing Nerima can tell you, even in the sector that we are in, you advertise for a job in this country. Like I think 2 months ago, we advertised for a project officer position. And I think we only advertised for less than 4 days. We got 1,752 CVs. And some of them are even overqualified for that particular position. It just tells you, and that is like 4 days. So it means whoever didn't see it, and even after that, people kept on sending. CSR Place receives even like double that number within a very, very short time. So that can tell you, and sometimes you have people who not only have masters, guys who have begun doing their PhD. We live in a country where we have about 1 million people who graduate every year from institutions of higher learning and TVETs and all, but the country can only accommodate like 50,000. So what does that mean? Yet, the informal sector, the majority of the guys that are in the informal sector are also what Wamkono young people are trying to see what they can do with the leadership that they have. And even with that particular background, where people can barely even afford to put 2 meals on the table, you want to tax basic commodities. You want to tax vegetable oil. You want to tax bread. And then people have gone ahead to create a niche for themselves, as a source of income in the digital content creation sector. You still want to go there and you did not even contribute. You're not even doing much to grow that particular sector, but you want to go ahead and tax that sector. And people are seeing how majority of the guys who enjoy even opulence in this country, in the government, the party leader, and also political parties that were formed just to take over, power, and it's not even based on ideology. And I think we also need to question even the role of political parties in getting us where we are currently, because the parties we see right now, like these are not even parties that have been there for 20 years. What does that mean? That you serve the interests of the party leader and not the people who voted for you to be there. But also, even for the president, I think the fact that sometimes, even at the initial phase of, UDA taking over power, there was that chest stamping of, hey, it's our time. It's a time for hustlers. Hustlers are coming to question you, like, hey, this is what you said. And then you meet them with force, forgetting that in as much as you became the president with 7.1 million votes, there were so many people who didn't turn up. What does that say in terms of legitimacy? And I had even Professor Monda speak to legitimacy. Imagine 8 million people who are registered voters chose to boycott the election. What does that mean? 4.5 million young people decided not to register to vote. And then you have 6.9 million people who didn't even vote for you. So you have 20 million people who do not have trust in terms of you're going to deliver for this country. So when you sit there and you don't think about whether it's cohesion in this country, whether it's delivering on your promise, because the numbers should just tell you, why didn't I even get 15 million votes? Like 20 million people or 15 million people who are of voting age did not vote for me. What does that mean? So I think the high cost of doing business in this country, the impact of corruption on the quality of life, and corruption is just not the money that we lose. It's also the things that we don't see. It's our sick people at home that we can't even afford to take to better private hospital to get better Medicare. Majority of us are even caregivers here. You have a sick person and you can only just afford a public hospital because that is what you can afford, right? So it's just not even about the things we see. It's the invisible things that are triggered by corruption. And I think lastly, it's also the stalled projects that we've seen. I think with every government, whether it's stadiums, whether it's dams, whether it's markets, whether it's promises to young people and opportunities, like all the stalled projects with the people who've been in all those other governments that we're talking about that have not been fulfilled. Because even the people in power right now have been in the last 2, 3, 4 governments. And there was, I think, a figure that I read some time back in terms of since Kibaki's time up to right now, where we find ourselves, we have lost about 9 trillion installed projects. 9 trillion. Look at how much we're trying to borrow. So I think people are just tired of being told to be resilient. We come from homes where our parents have been resilient. But Gen Z, young people are saying, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. I don't have a choice. Thank you.
Wow, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And the way you're saying close to 2,000 applications in 4 days, that's saying that issue also of employment. People are qualified for the position, but you're just so desperate looking for a job that seems to be not forthcoming that you just apply for something that you're very well overqualified for. And I think that brings me to the issue of foreign jobs, which was talked about by President on Sunday, of him sorting. Part of the ways he was sorting out the unemployment crisis was by having those jobs abroad. And maybe, Madge, you can comment to this because you have the Diaspora Network and you're in contact with many people who are working abroad and even looking for opportunities abroad. What is the situation in the diaspora when it comes to the job market, and whether is it just looking for the so-called quote unquote greener pastures, or is it because of the lack of employment back home that is forcing others to now look beyond the borders for these opportunities?
Thank you so much, Claire, for the question. Now, there are a lot of people that are looking for jobs in the diaspora. And of course, if they want to look for jobs in the diaspora, it's not a problem. The problem comes in when the government is trying to act like an agency. The government should have a bilateral agreement like they do now. With Germany, for example, they have a labor mobility agreement that's going to be implemented in September. The only problem comes when the government does not create an enabling environment back home, because when we work here in the diaspora, we want to be able to come back home and retire back home. And that is not happening. And to see the government really, even the ministries that are saying Kazi Diaspora. No, the mandate they have is to really also make sure that there are jobs back home and not only the diaspora. And that would mean that if I want to invest back home, I'm able to invest back home and even create jobs there. But of course, like said, the corruption is even hindering some of us from creating jobs back home. Jobs in the diaspora are good, but we have to ensure that there's no absolute brain drain. If I can give an example, I'll give an example for Germany because I live here. So if you, Claire, come to Germany, you're going to be giving the government of Germany almost 50% of your taxes. So Kenya is going to lose on 50% of your taxes. So you're going to be sending money home, okay, but remember, Germany is getting 50%. Then you're going to be paying for pensioners in Germany. That is what the people who are doing, that's how their system is. When you're working, you pay. But when you look back home, there are people who are even claiming their pensions and are not getting them because of 1 to 3 reasons. So there needs to be a balance. When I'm here in diaspora, I'm supposed to be able to create at least 10 jobs back home, at least, so that when somebody wants to leave the diaspora, they should be having a choice. Yeah, there should be jobs there. So currently, the idea of bringing people in the diaspora, as I see sometimes, they want to take people to do labor, the manual jobs. I would really highly encourage people coming to Europe to do those jobs, and I would discourage people coming to Europe to do the manual jobs, because these countries, especially the western part, they are rich countries, so you need to really just learn the language. For example, in Germany, then you're good to go. But then the problems begins when you're even earning money that you cannot invest back home. Jobs in Saudi Arabia, I would not encourage, because, as you know, Saudi Arabia and the other issues around there. So if your human rights are not protected, many things, and so those are not things I want to see Kenyans doing. I know that Kenyans are very talented people. So if the government should specifically with the German one, the bilateral agreement that they have, please make sure that qualified Kenyans are coming to do jobs they qualified for. We don't want Kenyans coming here to start harvesting strawberries. That's a no. So yes, there are jobs here, and the reason why these countries are also seeking to have people from back home is because the economy has shrunk. If you've read the news, you realize that the economy is, or for most of these European countries, have shrunk. So they're looking at the young population that we have back home in Kenya, to come in and fill in this gap. And Germany has been doing that. Not only this one, they have, for example, a program called Africa Compt. And so the translated to Africa is coming. So they were identifying graduates who have at least 2 years experience, bringing them over, training them, getting them into industries and training them. And later you can decide if you want to stay in Germany or not. So coming to abroad is really not a problem, but it becomes a problem when the government that has a mandate to create back jobs at home is actually using that as a scapegoat and trying to become an agent in that manner. So that is where I have a problem with that, because they should be protecting our interests, and that is not happening. The countries where people are moving to are going to benefit more than Kenya itself. So that is the one issue I would have with it. Thank you, and back to you, Claire.
Okay, thanks. So as you said, the problem is not going to work abroad. It's that you should be able to have the choice, not that it's a last resort situation. And it shouldn't be that people are going to do casual labor abroad. And once they decide that they want to come, they should be able to have the option to come and not start worrying about their pension and whatnot. And I think we also talk, while we're on the matter of the diaspora, there have been a lot of stories about the protests also happening in the diaspora, and you'll give us a little picture of what the situation is where you're at. But I'd also like to hear from Professor Wanda a little bit about the situation on protests, because there have been different views on what the situation abroad in the diaspora is. What is your reading of the situation when it comes to the protests abroad?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the diaspora community, I can speak for the US, is very much in solidarity with the protesters. We had a protest here in New York on Saturday, this past weekend, at the Kenyan Embassy. Before that, there was another one in Washington, D.C. And I think next week there'll be another protest in Washington, D.C. at the embassy about the whole issue of extrajudicial killings, the challenges around governance, and more broadly, this question about the asymmetrical relationship between the United States and Kenya. So I don't think our media, when they came here, did a good job about really interrogating the kind of agreements the Ruto administration was getting in with Biden. I think a lot of them were very fixated with taking pictures at the White House to put on their Facebook, on their Twitter, taking the menu at the state dinner, and very excited to put this on social media. And I think they really forgot their role as journalists to really hold President Ruto's feet to the fire. Specifically, this question of the debt and these IMF conditionalities. This should have been something that should have come out during President Ruto's visit about exactly what agreements have you signed with the IMF. There's no transparency. There's no accountability, because a lot of times when we sign these debt agreements, and the diaspora is constantly very concerned about this, a lot of that money doesn't leave New York, it doesn't leave Washington. By that I mean, Kenya takes a lot of these loans, but it ends up in the pockets of elites who end up buying apartments here in the Upper East Side in New York, or in Los Angeles, or in Washington, D.C., or Toronto, Canada, or London. Right. So this has been a continuing problem that diasporans have been concerned about. And this is part of the other reason why they support the protests. But I must add, Claire, that I think diasporans, and I think I wrote about this in one of our local media, papers. I think the quality of our diplomatic representation is extremely underwhelming. We've had diplomats come to lead missions here in the US who've been DJs in Kenya, who've never left Kenya. We've had, and we continue to have, individuals who are political failures, and they are rewarded with diplomatic postings to Washington, to LA, and to New York. And this adds to this broader question of the failings of our foreign policy and how it impacts our domestic policy. Because these diplomats, they're not job ready. They're not part of the bureaucratic system. They've not lived abroad. They don't know how to challenge or to interrogate some of these bilateral agreements. And that's another area, diasporans are also very concerned about. I think lastly, I tied to your earlier question about the brain drain, I think I very much side with our previous speakers around how you have to have this balance. Ideally, the government really needs to ensure that Kenyans have opportunities in Kenya so that they don't have to go abroad. It's incredible how many Kenyans come from Kenya and end up doing jobs that are completely outside of their skill set when they come from Kenya. They're engineers in Kenya, they're architects, they're lawyers, but they end up mostly coming to the US and ending up as nurses. And there's nothing wrong with being a nurse. It's just that if you trained as a lawyer, as an engineer, as a mathematician in Kenya, as a banker, right? Well, why are you, starting out as a nurse back in the US? And Kenyans need to understand, if you leave Kenya to work abroad, like in the US, I can talk about the US, you're literally starting over. So you have to get a new resume, you have to build new connections, you have to understand the system. So I think that's another failing in terms of how diaspora and how we see, the interaction of our government and the diaspora. There seems to be a big mismatch in terms of how we take care of Kenyans who are abroad. I think the last point I'd mentioned, Claire, is something that we don't talk about a lot, but the number of Kenyans that are currently in the US in detention because the government of Kenya has not stepped in to help them with their paperwork, with their immigration. I think this is another challenge that we really need to also think about. And also the number of Kenyans that are deported from the US who will not admit it to you when you meet them in the streets of Mombasa or Nairobi, but they get deported from the US. But the challenge is the government has not aggressively stepped up to actually advocate for their rights in the United States. So I think, again, going back to this mismatch between our domestic policy, how the government treats Kenyans in Kenya or mistreats them, and how that leads to a lot of Kenyans ending up abroad and actually ending up very frustrated when they go to Germany or to the United States, because it's not a bed of roses out here. It's also extremely, extremely difficult. But I think also the other challenge is a lot of diasporans who've been here for many years may want to come back to Kenya, but when they see the kind of problems with corruption, problems with human rights abuses, abductions, a lot of people are just too tired of drama. And a lot of them would just stay abroad, and the value of their retirement, the value of their children, and the assets and knowledge they get ends up benefiting, the host countries. So I think these are broader questions that we really need to interrogate as we go forward in terms of what do we do from here after these protests? How do we ensure the reform? How do we clean out the parliament so we really have people who are accountable to the Mwananchi? And how do we clean out State House so that we really have leaders that are accountable, not to Washington, D.C., but to Kenyans in Kenya?
Wow. That you're putting there, and as you said, then there's need for accountability. Now I want to sample some few comments, and then I'll go to you, Madge, to also talk about the issue of the protests in the diaspora, because I can see a comment here that's even asking about that. Then we'll go to Nerima just to talk about how social media is being used as a force. Now there's one comment over here from okay, Anthony Muredi, you're saying you want to give your comment and contribution about how the situation is affecting SMEs. I'll give you a chance to do that in the next 10 minutes. Then Arthur says Gen Z needs to be focused on finding ways to keep off goons from their midst. Thanks for that comment. And there was a comment here that was asking about how protests in the diaspora have an effect locally, and maybe you can speak to that, Madge, as I get other comments, and then we will speak a little bit about how social media is a force in all this situation. So Madge, you can speak a little bit to that and the situation of the protests.
Thanks, Claire. So, as you have seen, the diaspora came out in large numbers to protest, and these were in different diaspora countries. So, in Europe, of course, Germany, at least 7 towns came out to protest. And in Scotland, so in Germany, Berlin actually protested 3 times. In Scotland, they protested 2 times. UK protested 2. So Britain protested 2 times, and had also a night vigil yesterday for those who have been brutally murdered during these demonstrations, where we really also express our condolences. Czech Republic also demonstrated. France, Netherlands had a stop at the ICC, and they also had a symbolic burial. Australia protested daily from Tuesday and Thursday, and Austria to Ireland, and of course many other towns in the US, as already mentioned by the previous speaker. So the question was, why were the diasporans, why did they come out in large numbers to demonstrate? This is because the diasporans they did not only demonstrate against the finance bill, but also condemned the police brutality. And the war are very concerned because Kenya is their second home. And a majority of them, like said before, would wish to retire back home. So the problems that Kenyans in Kenya experience are really also the same. It's like just it marries with the problems of diasporans. So if I can take one example of overtaxation, so when you increase the taxes back home there, but you're not enabling you're not providing an enabling environment, and people are jobless, you are indirectly increasing the black tax in the diaspora. So high taxes back there, people they cannot even start up their businesses. So that was impacting us directly. Another thing that was impacting the diaspora directly was lack of proper functioning statutory health insurances like the NHIF that's currently now being transitioned to another program. That means that we've seen also in the dailies that there's a lot of corruption going in there, where they were saying that some payments were made in oversight due to typos. I hope they're going to be called on to account for that. But when this system is not functioning, then the diasporans have to really pay for their sick relatives, in private hospitals. And that is to the tune of sometimes $1 million shillings per month, especially if the people are ICU. And for ICU, the hospital beds at the public hospitals are also not easy to get. They're always just reserved. So that is not, that's why they mostly go to the private area. And then another thing that was, at least they withdrew it, but the question is, why did they even suggest it in the first place, where they were planning to, make the titles a leasehold and not freehold? So that meant for the diaspora, the land that we've already bought, they want to change the titles from free to leasehold. And if we're investing again, then the land is not 100% going to belong to us. And then they actually also did not really consult. They never consult with the diasporans, and that is what they felt like, okay, we need to be part of it, but we are never consulted. And then really a living example as we speak is that there's a diaspora policy document currently being written, but the majority of diasporans will tell you that they did not participate in that. So the government does not only ignore Kenyans in their diaspora, but in Kenya, but they also ignore Kenyans in the diaspora because they've tended to only look at them as ATMs. So what is important is for them is the remittances that we pay. So, but now, why, to come to your question, was there impact locally? Yes, there was impact locally, because what we were doing was we were trying to also push the government here to let them know. If I can speak for Germany, we actually tagged the Chancellor of Germany because we know about this bilateral agreement. So if Germany is working with Kenya, then we must have shared values. So it cannot be that the democracy is defined differently in Germany than it is defined in Kenya. And I mean, the whole EU like that. So the killings and the rest of that pressure, we put a lot of pressure there. And we know that these things, they move together. Another person, the two dignitaries that we really tagged that have been to Kenya. So that is how we expected them to actually help through, because back here we know that they're under pressure themselves, also having lost in the previous EU parliament. And so that's a weapon we had in our hand. But most importantly, as a community leader, I would like to keep advising Kenyans coming to Germany that the police is your friend. But how can I, when the police is brutalizing people down there? So those are things we just needed to make them aware that here's a problem. And of course, that will impact because they don't want their citizens hearing about them causing chaos. And currently in Europe, there's a rise in the right-wing parties where people are constantly being told, foreigners, you need to leave. So yes, diasporans really just wanted to also secure their home, And so finally, I think that's the next point that I wanted to say. The diasporans really demonstrated, because they feel the problems are also their problems. They want to have some solidarity, but they don't only want to demonstrate, they also want to participate in the elections. But this has not been made very possible. Sorry. That is why last time we had only 10,000 people in the diaspora voting, because for Europe, for example, you only have 2 polling stations in Berlin and in London. So that means you're actually expecting somebody to fly in from Finland to come and vote in Berlin. So as a result, the diasporans have actually, I told them I'm coming here. They've expressed their wish to be actually, put forward, so that for all the embassies in the diaspora, they can be petitioned so that they can act as voting and polling stations. In that way, more diasporans are going to really register and be able to vote. And apart from that, they should also add at least 6 mobile voting centers for the diasporans. When that is done, the millions of the diasporans that are here, when they need to also help their home country, they don't only have to be reactive when something is happening, but they can also participate and bring in the millions of vote there and show their support also, and just be alive in the politics and the affairs of Kenya. Thank you, and back to you, Claire.
Thank you for that. A number of good points that you've put there, and the way you talked about that black tax and that domino effect that now people from the diaspora have to pay bills, and they have to pay it in private hospitals, because even if they were looking for space in the private wards, it's a difficult situation. And the way you also talked about the land amendment bill, which also brings the issue that Nerima had discussed about people are not even quite sure of like what next. And so I think I'd like us to talk a little bit about that and the role of social media when it comes to civic education, because before the rejection of the finance bill, there was this translation of the clauses of the bill to very many different languages. People were really making an effort to help people understand it. So maybe, Nerima, I'll direct that question to you. And then I can see there are so many requests to speak. I'll start opening them up in the next 5 minutes. So just hold on. In the next 5 minutes, we'll open it up. But Nerima, let's talk a little bit about the role of social media when it comes to civic education and really just educating people on not just the finance bill, but different laws and their rights and obligations. You can take that, and then Bina can also contribute to that. Then we'll open up the comment section and the other listeners to contribute.
Yeah, sure. So 2022 was the first time where IBC had the permission of people to use their devices, their cell phone devices, to sort of monitor the vote. So we had people being able to take pictures not only of their voting, but also party agents were able to share the forms that were filled at the end of the count. And this is important to highlight because of people being able to also monitor their vote at home and follow the process and not necessarily rely on national media as we waited for the results. Only media could announce who the winner was. So that section of monitoring is important because social media played a massive role in 2022. So there was also an article that was done by Odanga Madum where he shared that TikTok, which then was only 3 years old, was the platform that had suddenly grown as a space where people were articulating issues in regards to the election, but also a space where a lot of hate speech was being shared, and there was a lot of information coming across. So that's important to note because with this particular movement, we did see different people